An ice factory 200 kilometers north of Bangkok wouldn't seem to most of us an ideal venue to make a blockbuster movie. But in August of 1971, a Hong Kong film production company decided that it was just that. The film was called The Big Boss. The production company was Golden Harvest. And the star was Bruce Lee. The film's setting was Pak Chong, Thailand, which in Bruce Lee's day was a small, underdeveloped village. Located 124 miles northeast of Bangkok, Pak Chong is nestled in the foot of a range of mountains separating the Menam Plain from the Korat Plateau. In Bruce Lee's day, there was one solitary road coming into Pak Chong. Now it boasts a 4-lane highway. The ice factory that served as the central focus of the film is still operational almost 40 years after The Big Boss was filmed here. The present owner, who was a child of 10 when The Big Boss was filmed in his village, recalls that the bell Bruce rung in the movie was actually a bomb that had been cut in half and employed as a bell owing to its unique tone. The original bomb bell was long ago taken to a scrapyard and discarded. The owner also recalls precisely where the crew of The Big Boss filmed their scenes at the ice factory, and even knows where the original ice saw blades are located. Blades that, in the film, were used not only to cut through ice, but to cut through and help dispose of human bodies that had gotten wise to the Big Boss's drug smuggling operation.
The things changed a lot, after Bruce Lee gone.
So maybe now you're the big boss.
I'm here the big boss. Two big boss here, this ice pack. But generous,
yes,
and very good, and very good person.
Yes.
A genial man, the present owner is used to people from all over the world stopping by to see the Bruce Lee locale that is now his family business. He has made changes to the ice factory over the years. The foreman's office that abutted the ice dock was long ago torn down and replaced by a more modern version. The side it was located on has been moved by 15 feet or so to accommodate a driveway. He has removed the large water tower and replaced it with a swimming pool for his family.
The original Pak Chong Ice Factory has changed quite a bit since Bruce Lee fought here. That pole plays a very significant role in being able to identify exactly where the film was shot. Because this factory has been recessed, or it was recessed in 1971 when the movie was made. Of course, it's expanded considerably now over the past 38 years. But right in front of me, in 1971, August of 1971, Bruce Lee had his first ever fight on camera in The Big Boss. And of course, the world of action cinema would never be the same.
The other structure that has remained unchanged all these years is this storage shed, located some 20 yards to the left of the ice factory. And 10 feet from its shaky frame is the site of Bruce Lee's second fight sequence in this film, a spectacular battle with the Big Boss's henchmen, which was filmed at nighttime. There never was an ice storage shed.
And this, I think, was built for the movie, that little shed, because the big garage is behind it.
Oh, this one, they just make it for the movie.
For the
After
movie.
that, they throw it out.
good. So we had confirmation on that. That's
Yeah,
cool.
sure.
The production crew of The Big Boss had erected a facade of a building, and it was within this facade that the battle began. After filming a battle like that, Lee and his adversaries would need to rest up, and while in Pak Chong, they did so here, at the Rim Tarn Inn. In 1971, this hotel was known as the New Wan Chai Hotel, and certain staff members remain from that time. A lady employed at the New Wan Chai as a housekeeper during the time that Bruce Lee and the crew were filming still remembers Lee, and what room he stayed in. The view from the window in Lee's room reveals a courtyard that once contained a swimming pool for its guests. Upon entering the lobby, she recollects seeing Lee practicing his fight scene choreography on an almost daily basis in this location. Another favorite location at the hotel that Lee used to warm up and practice techniques prior to heading for the set was this area just beside the hotel. Her most vivid memory from 38 years ago involving Bruce Lee was when he asked her if she could help remove the mattress from his room, saying he preferred to sleep on the hard floor owing to a back injury he had sustained. Another of the film's more memorable moments was filmed about 200 yards behind the hotel, along the banks of a river. In this locale, which appears 3 times in the film, Lee is seen taking his final vows for revenge after his other relatives have been murdered and his cousin has been kidnapped by the Big Boss's henchmen. The Little Waterfalls has changed little since Bruce Lee filmed these scenes. The tree that Lee walks in front of still stands, albeit considerably larger after almost 40 years. Even a big rock that appears in the scene is still present, identified not only by its oblong shape, but by the peculiar scarring that appears along its surface. This little waterfall still provides serenity and calm to contrast the hustle and bustle of the Pak Chong streets beyond it. One of these streets was the locale for another famous scene from the film, in which Bruce Lee's character, after a night of drinking, wakes up, to his shock, in a brothel. As he hastily exits the establishment, he is embarrassed to encounter his cousin delivering laundry to the facility. And as he hurriedly runs away, he passes a sign bearing Thai letters. That exact sign still stands on the same pole, on the same spot of the same street today, making it easy to locate the location where this scene was filmed. According to the local merchants on the street, the original wooden building that Bruce Lee is shown coming out of burned down, along with several others on the street. These have been replaced by more modern, more fireproof establishments. But that road sign, for all its dents and years, still stands as a marker, indicating the sidewalk that Bruce Lee once ran along almost 4 decades ago. Another locale that is still present in Thailand is the pier that audiences will recognize from its appearance in the very first scene of the film. Today, its unique X-formed foundation is all that indicates its significance in action film history. It, like the Ice Factory, still operates today, ferrying passengers across the river to get to work and return home. The terminal itself still plays host to local vendors and tradespeople. The outside of the terminal still faces busy streets, albeit much busier ones these days. The ferry sequence was filmed in an area that is considerably closer to Bangkok than it is to Pak Chong. As a result, it was filmed near the end of the production's time in Thailand and allowed the crew to stay at a bigger hotel, the Hotel Damak. In 1971, the Hotel Damak was called the Thai Hotel, and it is another location that is almost exactly the same now as it was 40 years ago when Bruce Lee stayed here. In 1971, this man was the hotel's controller, and as with the lady at the Rim Tarn Inn, he too remembers the hotel's famous guest vividly. This, he recollects, was the very room that Bruce Lee occupied while at the Hotel Damak. Many of the room's contents remained unchanged since Bruce Lee checked in. Present are the same mirror, the same window frame, and the same view from the same balcony. According to Lee's co-star, Mary Yee, Lee would sun himself by this pool, although he never swam in it. As in his hotel in Pak Chong, while in Bangkok, Lee evidently preferred being near fire exits. And at the Hotel Damak, our controller recalls watching Lee practice his martial arts on the hotel fire escape, which was conveniently, if not deliberately, located just outside his hotel room door. And while the locales of hotels, waterfalls, and ice factories are impressive in their own right, the most impressive and significant Bruce Lee locale in all of Thailand, and perhaps of any Bruce Lee sites still remaining, is the Big Boss's house. The house itself was formerly a crematorium in Pak Chong, and sometime after filming wrap, the house was donated to a Buddhist order, where it is now referred to by the townspeople of Pak Chong merely as the temple. It is as if one has entered a time capsule and been transported back to 1971. It has the same entranceway, the same hallway, the same basement stairs, and the same rooms and walls that were seen in the film.
Very cool. I don't think anyone's been in here since Bruce filmed here in 1971.
The landmarks are so well preserved you can almost still see Bruce Lee walking up to the entrance gate of the compound. The only difference now being the addition of flags on the fence posts. and as one looks out over the expanse of the boss's yard, it is almost as if one is walking with ghosts. The large spirit house in the center of the temple's yard appears many times throughout The Big Boss. Such spirit houses abound in Thailand, as well as in the Southeast Asian countries of Cambodia and Laos. The house is intended to provide a shelter for spirits that might create problems for people if not appeased. It is the ancient religion of animism that, over the centuries, has come to be blended with Buddhism in these countries. The pool is still present, although drained of its water for over 15 years. Different sections of the front lawn hosted different scenes from The Big Boss. On this section, Lee engaged the boss himself in one of the most spectacular fight sequences ever filmed.
It was up this walkway in 1971 that Bruce Lee filmed what for many people remains perhaps his most inspirational scene. It was where he combated racial injustice when he was denied entry to this park, which is called the Parc de Louis de Camoes, right here in Macau.
The scene was based on a long-standing legend that the Chinese have passed down through many generations. The legend has it that during the Japanese occupation of Shanghai, a park in the Bund was declared off-limits to Chinese and dogs. It was a national insult that would be repeated by Chinese families with shame, that they could be made to feel as second-class citizens in their own country. However, that's Wong Pu Park in Shanghai. The park that Golden Harvest Studios selected to represent it in Fist of Fury is the Parc de Louis Camoes in Macau.
What's the name of the park?
All right, see if I can pronounce this correctly. Parc de Louis de Camoes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And that's the spot where Bruce Lee stood.
It is. The sign that he picked actually it was moved up higher in his day, so they've lowered it a little bit. The bottom of the sign you see in the movies where it lined with that. So it's pretty impressive. Okay.
In the film, Lee's character never makes it past the entrance to the park, which is a shame, as it is not only one of Macau's oldest parks, but also its largest, covering an area of nearly 24,000 square yards. The park originally was the house of a Portuguese merchant. After the merchant died, his residence was donated to the government, which in turn used it to commemorate the great Portuguese poet Luís de Camões. Tradition has it that the poet lived in Macau for 2 years, during which time he often came to this park and displayed copies of his poems for all to see. Camões died on June 10th, and every year on that day, a holiday is held in Macau, wherein the Portuguese in Macau assemble in the park to celebrate the holiday and remember the poet. Since the remainder of Fist of Fury was filmed on a soundstage that has long since been torn down, the Parc de Louis de Camoes is the only locale from that film still in existence.
The Colosseum in Rome. When it opened in 80 AD, over 10,000 lives were taken in that first week. Gladiators, slaves, animals, all fought to the death behind these very walls. And so it provided a great backdrop for a combative film between two modern-day gladiators in the form of Bruce Lee and American martial artist Chuck Norris.
Over 5,000 people a day passed through the same entranceway that Bruce Lee walked when he entered the Colosseum. When it was completed in 80 AD, it was called the Flavian Amphitheater to commemorate the Flavian victory over Judea. It took 10 years of ingenious Roman engineering and slave muscle to complete its construction. Its height of 157 feet makes it the equivalent in size of a 15-story building. Elliptical in design, it is 620 feet long by 513 feet wide, with 80 entrances and a retractable canvas roof that could be drawn across the top of the Colosseum to shield spectators from the sun or the rain. The Colosseum held up to 50,000 spectators, each with a numbered ticket, who entered through 76 of the entrances on the ground level. 2 more entrances were reserved for the Emperor Titus, and 2 more were reserved for the gladiators. A wooden flooring was used to cover the subterranean chambers where the gladiators and animals were kept prior to their performance. During the first 10 years of its existence, the stadium would often be filled with water and used for mock naval battles. Lee's filming in the Colosseum was achieved without permits, resulting in a lot of handheld camera work. Most of the footage was shot on the first and second levels of the Colosseum, but they also made use of the third level, which is presently closed to the public. Only the exteriors leading up to this famous cinematic battle were filmed in the Colosseum. The actual fight scene was shot on a soundstage back in Hong Kong at Golden Harvest Studios. The fight scene, which Lee painstakingly choreographed and that took both men 5 days to film, stands like the Colosseum itself, a classic of its genre. The Way of the Dragon would mark Bruce Lee's directorial debut. He also wrote the screenplay for the movie, making it easily his most personal film. In addition, all of the exteriors were shot in Rome, a city that is replete with historical landmarks dating back some 2,000 years. When the film opens, Lee's character is waiting to be met at the International Arrivals Terminal at Rome's Leonardo da Vinci Airport. The airport has grown considerably in the almost 40 years since The Way of the Dragon was filmed here, and dramatic structural change has occurred. However, the filming locations in and around the airport are still recognizable. Leonardo da Vinci Airport is the largest airport in Italy and the first international air gateway of the country. Over 35 million passengers utilize its services on a yearly basis. On a road located just outside the airport, Lee's car is seen driving by a statue of Da Vinci. It appears on camera only briefly in the film, but it's interesting to discover that the statue still stands. Although the road next to it that Lee and co-star Nora Mao drove along has now been replaced by office buildings and parking structures. After the establishing shot of the airport, Lee's car goes on a virtual tour of the sights of Rome. Up first is the Piazza del Popolo, or Plaza of the People. The piazza lies inside the northern gate of the Aurelian Walls, and prior to the advent of railroads, it was a traveler's first view of Rome upon his arrival. Part of its less glittering history is the fact that for centuries, the Piazza del Popolo was also a place for public executions, the last of which took place in 1826. Nevertheless, the piazza is magnificent in its bounty of statuary and fountains. For centuries, the piazza had a public cone-shaped fountain in its center, but in 1589, Pope Sixtus V replaced the fountain with the Egyptian obelisk of Ramses II, which towers some 73 feet in height. The obelisk was built in 1300 BC. It had originally been brought to Rome by the Emperor Augustus and had stood within the middle of the Circus Maximus to celebrate the conquest of Egypt. The scene in The Way of the Dragon was filmed on the Pincio Hill, which provides a magnificent view of what is generally considered to be the last papal contribution to Rome's legendary architecture. Lee's car is next seen passing by the Arch of Constantine, named after the emperor who made Christianity the official religion of Rome. It is situated between the Colosseum and the Palatine Hill, and was erected to commemorate Constantine's victory over Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge on October 38, 312. The large arch with 3 archways stands some 69 feet high and is almost 85 feet wide, and is the last of the existing triumphal arches of Rome. Continuing on, Lee's car next passes the national monument of Victor Emmanuel II, the first king of a unified Italy. The monument was designed in 1895, inaugurated in 1911, and completed in 1935. Although the shot of it in The Way of the Dragon was brief and taken from within a moving car, one can still spot the pure white marble of its majestic stairways, Corinthian columns, and fountains. It stands over 230 feet high and takes up 443 feet in width. A huge equestrian sculpture of Victor Emmanuel catches the eye as one drives past. The next pass of Lee's car takes the viewer past the Piazza del Campidoglio, which was designed by Michelangelo. The Campidoglio, or Capitoline Hill, is the smallest of Rome's 7 hills, but it remains the religious and political center of the city ever since its foundation more than 2,500 years ago. The piazza was completed in the 17th century and faces west toward St. Peter's, the Christian equivalent of the Capitol. In the center of the plaza stands a statue of Marcus Aurelius. Lee's car then proceeds to pass by one of the most famous sights in all of Rome, the Trevi Fountain. At 85 feet high and 65 feet wide, the Trevi Fountain is the largest Baroque fountain in the city. Standing at its center is a statue of Neptune, flanked by horse-riding tritons that symbolize a stormy sea on the left and a calm sea on the right. Behind Neptune are the niche statues representing health and abundance. Although other fountains had occupied this space previously, the one seen in The Way of the Dragon was built between 1732 and 1762 for Pope Clement XII. Tradition has it that if one throws a coin into the fountain, one is ensured a return to Rome. Many people take this to heart, as it has been estimated that over 3,000 euros, the equivalent of roughly $4,400 US, are thrown into this fountain every day. Lee's car finally comes to park in the street alongside the Hotel Flora on the famous Via Veneto. What appears to be the entrance to female lead Nora Mao's apartment is, in reality, the entrance to the hotel's laundromat. The Way of the Dragon also filmed on some of Rome's more famous streets, such as the Via Veneto. And additional exterior shots were filmed on streets near the Termini train station. And one of the locations, the Giuliani Cafe, is still going strong 37 years after filming stopped on The Way of the Dragon. But then 37 years is nothing to Giuliani's. It's been in business in Rome since 1897. Giuliani's is located right across the street from another location from The Way of the Dragon, the bank. And it was in the bank that Bruce Lee and Nora met Riccardo Billi, an Italian actor-producer who also served as the Rome location manager for Bruce Lee's company while in Italy. Billi is presently a film producer in Rome and looks back on his days working on The Way of the Dragon and with Bruce Lee with fondness.
I was very surprised that the Chinese man come here to shoot a movie. I think it was all foolish. But then I realized that this man has a great personality. And I thought that he would become something important. But that's really at the end of the movie when I realized everything. Because in the beginning I'd say, there are crazy people here doing something that I don't even know what it is, you know.
Immediately following the bank scene is a scene involving Italian actress and model Melissa Longo, who, interestingly enough, ended up marrying Riccardo Billi after filming The Way of the Dragon.
It was funny because before to come here, we went in his hotel, and then as I enter, I show him making training. He started 2 hours before. The appointment was 8 in the morning. At 6 o'clock, he started 2 hours before on training.
Wow.
He did that every morning.
Every morning?
Yes.
Melissa's scene took place in the Piazza Navona with the famous Four Rivers Fountain as its backdrop. The Four Rivers Fountain was designed by Gian Lorenzo Bernini in the mid-1600s. Its base features a horse, a palm tree, and a lion, all of which are believed to have been carved by the master himself. The four statues represent the four rivers of the then known continents: the Danube, the Nile, the Ganges, representing Asia, the Rio de la Plata, which has a bag of coins on its ledge representing the riches of the Americas, and of course, the papal insignia is prominent, as not only did Pope Innocent X commission the fountain, but it proclaims the Church's influence on the four continents and asserts the triumph of the Church, the papacy, and the reigning papal family. Of course, it doesn't take long for the action to start in The Way of the Dragon. Anders Nelson, a Hong Kong native of Swedish descent, has the distinction of appearing in this scene with Lee. Nelson, a musician by profession, remembers with fondness his role in the film and the experience of working with Bruce Lee.
Well, there was actually a bunch of us, and he did tell us that we were Italian thugs in a back alley, and then he picked me for some reason to be the guy to attack him. He did say I should be extremely accurate and very careful in not being, even half an inch more forward, because the nunchakus were for real.
Oh, they were the real nunchakus?
Oh, they were the real thing.
The polyethylene ones.
They whistled, as they went by. I actually misjudged, and I got hit right here. One of the reasons I grew a mustache in the beginning was because I had a slight scar here. I wasn't badly hurt. And my sort of favorite little anecdote from that time is he kept coming up to me and shaking my hand, and his handshake was so powerful that actually hurt more than being hit by the nunchaku.
After dispatching the thugs, Lee's sightseeing tour of Rome continues, and up next is a stop by the Campidoglio for an expansive view of the Roman Forum. Located in a valley between the Palatine Hill and the Capitoline Hill, the Roman Forum was originally a marsh, but the Romans drained the area and converted it into their center of social and political activity. It was then expanded to include temples, law courts, and the Senate House. When the empire fell, the Forum was forgotten. Only a few columns and stone blocks remain from some of the temples. Visible from Lee's vantage point are the 8 columns that remain of the Temple of Saturn, which was erected in 17 BC. The pair then move on from Roman times to the Renaissance era by traveling 54.6 miles east of Rome to the town of Tivoli, where they pause to visit the magnificent Villa d'Este. The Villa d'Este is renowned for its lush garden, statues, and magnificent fountains. It dates back to 150 AD. In the Way of the Dragon, 4 fountains are shown. When Lee's character walks down the stairs and turns right, he observes the Fontana dell'Ovato, or Oval Fountain. Lee's character is next seen walking the Avenue of the 100 Fountains. The fountain jets have the shape of lilies, eagles, lions, obelisks, and small boats, each of which is a miniature fountain unto itself. The 100 fountains are engineered on 3 levels, in which the waters of Tivoli's 3 rivers are said to slide symbolically. The fountains are a wonder of hydraulic engineering, making use of ancient Roman hydraulics, as well as a Roman tunnel that diverts water from the Aniene River to provide water to the sequence of the fountains. The fountain that really opens the eyes of Lee's character in the film is the Neptune Fountain. This is the only fountain in the Villa d'Este to be realized during the 20th century. Its spray shoots up some 20 feet. It is these flumes that spray Lee's character as he walks by on the upper level. Since the end of World War I, the villa has belonged to the Italian state, and extensive preservation and restoration efforts have been made over the years to ensure the integrity of its artifacts. The last locale used in Rome was the Campo di Verano Cemetery, a huge graveyard the size of a small city. Indeed, it's so big it has its own bus line. It was founded in the early 19th century and hosts several works by major Roman and Italian architects and sculptors, as well as large and ornate tombstones and family mausoleums. It was on this street within Campo di Verano Cemetery that the famous closing to the film was lensed, featuring Lee's character, Tong Long, walking off to his next and greatest adventure. As with his previous 2 films, Lee filmed a great deal of his scenes from Enter the Dragon on a soundstage on the Golden Harvest Studios lot. Both the studio and the soundstage upon which this epic fight sequence was staged have long since disappeared, a result of the studio having lost its lease shortly after the turn of the present century. The developer who acquired the property decided to tear down the film studio and replace it with 2 large apartment buildings. Well, I'm privileged to be walking with Chaplain Chang, and we're walking up the road where Golden Harvest used to be. So
it's somewhere around here. was the entrance to Golden Harvest. And it's all the way up, offices, and then car parks, and then higher up was the studios.
And the sound stages?
Sound stages.
Yeah.
And higher up was dormitories and props places and so forth. Yeah.
The locale where the majority of the action took place in Enter the Dragon was the martial arts compound in Han's courtyard. And this was actually the private estate and tennis courts of Hong Kong lawyer Lo Man Wei. In 1973, Chaplin Chang worked for Golden Harvest Studios. He also served as the assistant director for Enter the Dragon. He recalls how Lo's estate came to be selected for use in the film.
Because we all went out together to find locations, and after we passed South Q1, Hong Kong side, and we turned over to there, and we saw on our left was that empty place. We didn't know it was a tennis court or whatever. So Bob Klaus asked to stop, and we walked back. Small door. We went into there. Nobody was there. And we just walked, and then we realized it was tennis court. Then another step down, different level, another level down. And then we saw an old man was stood there working the stonework. So he turned and got up, and we talked. And we talk about that we want to shoot at him. It looks like this place is very good and so forth. He is quite agreeable. And then Bruce Lee also come. And they talk, and suddenly they realized they were relatives.
Being distant relatives secured the use of Lo's estate for filming the remainder of Enter the Dragon. Apart from his tennis courts, Lo's expansive estate included a large mansion that overlooked Tai Tam Bay. The mansion, along with most of the tennis courts, sold during the mid-1980s and was torn down. The estate was replaced by the prestigious American Club and its neighboring Pacific View apartment complex. And it is on the grounds of the American Club that one can still find remnants of the original walls and tennis courts that appeared in Enter the Dragon. These stone walls are immediately recognizable as they served as the backdrop for Lee's most famous battles at the climax of the film. Also recognizable are the portions of the upper part of the walls that are made of stone that was pulled from Tai Tam Bay many decades ago. A narrow walkway along one of the surviving walls still exists and appears quite similar to one that Lee used in chasing down Han during the film's epic finale. A small lookout area that Lee's character is seen jumping down from still exists. A stairway that once had been used by Lee and other cast members to access the film's martial arts compound now serves patrons who wish to play tennis or enjoy a breathtaking view of Tai Tam Bay. Most of the martial arts compound from the film has been, like the movie company that made the film, torn down. The demolition of Han's tournament grounds is extensive and can be determined by a comparison of aerial photographs taken in 1973 and present day, which reveal that all but one of the tennis courts have been demolished. And as one examines what's left, one is struck by the fact that there is no room for nostalgia in industry. A lone archway remains, now bricked over to prevent entry and exit. And yet what remains is sufficient to serve up tantalizing reminders of what once transpired on this section of land almost 4 decades ago, when the greatest martial arts movie of all time, Enter the Dragon, was filmed here. As Enter the Dragon was the first Bruce Lee film seen by most people in North America, the opening shot from that film represented their first introduction to the world of martial arts. And what better institution to represent the world of martial arts than the cradle of Kung Fu itself, the Shaolin Temple? Unfortunately, the real Shaolin Temple isn't located in Hong Kong, but Songshan in the Henan province of Dengfeng, China. As with the Shanghai Park scene in Fist of Fury, an alternate location was used as a stand-in for the real Shaolin Temple, and the producers selected the Ching Chung Kun Temple in the Chun Mun district of Hong Kong as its replacement. While the Shao in Shaolin refers to Mount Sahoshi, a mountain within China's Songshan mountain range, Ching Chung Kun translates as Green Pine Temple and is a Taoist temple, and one of the more popular tourist sites in Hong Kong. The temple and ornamental gateway seen in the opening shot of Enter the Dragon are still present, as are a wealth of other historical treasures. Ching Chung Kun opened originally as a rural retreat in 1949. And dotted around its well-designed grounds are pagodas, pavilions, ornamental archways, quadrangles, towers, Chinese gardens, and fish ponds, all enclosed by trees, shrubs, flowers, and potted plants. The temple also plays host to lanterns from Beijing's Imperial Palace. Fortunately, more of the film's locales remain. One such location is a massive cemetery located on the Hong Kong side. It was here that Lee's character in Enter the Dragon is shown paying his respects before the graves of his mother and sister. In reality, the headstone he was paying his respects before is that of a man who died over 80 years ago, Sheikh Akbar, a man who passed away on January 29, 1930, and was laid to rest in the Muslim section of the Hong Kong Cemetery in Happy Valley. Established in 1945, the Hong Kong Cemetery is a multi-faith cemetery, providing the final resting place for Hindus, Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Lee's scene was filmed at the cemetery's highest point, requiring both he and the crew to walk its 200 steps to the top. The old AIA building that was visible in the background of Lee's scene is still present, as are the original tombstones and trees. The tombstones have become much more plentiful over the years, and the trees have grown much bigger. But all in all, the Hong Kong Cemetery remains one of the more intact Bruce Lee film locations, and certainly one of the more intact locations from Enter the Dragon. Aberdeen Harbour. Located on the south side of Hong Kong Island, this small harbor was where the scenes of Lee and the rest of the fighters boarding a large junk to go to Hans Island were filmed. The harbor itself is named after the 4th Earl of Aberdeen, George Hamilton, who was the British colonial secretary in 1843. The harbor has, as one would expect, long been associated with fishermen, serving as a locale for sea-bound fishing junks to replenish their water and offload their catches. Within this harbor resides another famous local fixture, the floating restaurants. When Enter the Dragon filmed here, there were 2 of them, the Tai Pak and the Sea Palace. Presently, the Sea Palace has gone from the scene, and the Thai Pack has been incorporated into the Jumbo Kingdom, which claims to be the largest floating restaurant in the world. Another well-preserved Enter the Dragon filming location is this small rock jetty. Traveling by boat, it is obscure and easy to miss, blending in as it does so well with the Tai Tam Bay shoreline. But for Bruce Lee fans, it is worth the effort to locate, as this jetty is where the fighters in the film arrived on Hans Island. A small rock and concrete pathway that Lee and the fighters walked along in the film is still here, although erosion has collapsed part of it.
We're just getting out of the rain right now because it's not only been inordinately humid, but it just started pouring. So kind of standing in a little rock alcove that actually I think there's some shots of Bruce Lee and Jim Kelly during the filming of Enter the Dragon filmed here. I don't think they had to contend with the rain, but while they're waiting to set up the shot, they're kind of cooling their heels and in and around this area here.
The jetty itself has a significant history beyond its cinematic one, as it served as one of several key landing points on the island for the Japanese soldiers during the Second World War. In addition, the hillside behind the jetty was a site of a real battle with many casualties. This occurred between the invading Japanese and the British and Canadian soldiers who were defending Hong Kong. The Tai Tam waterfront area is now far more tranquil. Upon setting foot on Hans Island, the fighters walk along the tournament grounds and pass through a portal that finally lets them catch a glimpse of Han's palace. The shot used in the film required the use of a zoom lens that was set up at the upper level of the same Muslim cemetery in Happy Valley that they had filmed at earlier. And the Palace of Han, far from being a fortress on a remote island, as it was depicted in the film, is, in reality, a private mansion located in central Hong Kong that was built in 1937 and something of a local landmark. It is renowned for being a supreme example of Chinese Renaissance style, and its Chinese name translates into English as the House of Virtuous Views. And that it most certainly is, perched as it is on a huge sloping hillside on Hong Kong Island with a sweeping panoramic view of the city. But the best preserved Enter the Dragon location is one that played host to no less than 3 scenes in this classic movie. The Qingshan Monastery. It was here that all of Bruce Lee's martial philosophy scenes were filmed.
There was a scene that was filmed here in 1973 involving Bruce Lee and a monk played by Roy Chow. It was a scene that contained a lot of Bruce Lee's personal philosophy, and the producers of the film thought for some reason it would be above the heads or beyond the interest of most of the Western viewers. Well, how wrong they were. The scene was cut from 1973's version, but in 1998 Warner Brothers restored it and released it in their home DVD version.
Good martial artist does not become tense but ready. Not thinking yet, not dreaming. Ready for whatever may come. When the opponent expands, I contract. And when he contracts, I expand. And when there is an opportunity, I do not hit. It hits all by itself.
This scene was shot on an upper pathway above the Qingshan Monastery. The original pathway, along with the area's small concrete table and stools, are still present. For those wanting to walk in the footsteps of Bruce Lee, this pathway at the Qingshan Monastery is truly as good as it gets. And 20 feet below where this scene was shot can be found another walkway that appeared in the film. When Lee first encounters a British intelligence agent and is requested to work as an operative for him on Hans Island. During filming, Golden Harvest provided a small table and stools for the scene, but the scene itself was shot in this location. The only change to this area in the ensuing decades since Enter the Dragon was filmed here are the addition of 2 large red pillars. And these pillars actually mark the very spot where Bruce Lee stood and dodged kicks thrown at him from a young kung fu student in the next scene in the film. This is the pathway that the young student walked along in the film.
And when Tung Wai, who played the young student, ascended these stairs, he was met by his teacher, played by Bruce Lee, and was taught the famous finger pointing to the moon lesson, which has been oft repeated throughout Bruce Lee fandom for over 36 years.
It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory. Do you understand?
According to tradition, the Qingshan Monastery was founded by a traveling Indian monk who was passing through Hong Kong over 1700 years ago. He was said to have built a small cabin here, and when he died, his disciples erected a small pagoda on the site where his original cabin stood. Appropriately, the Qingshan Monastery has ornate sculptures of dragons throughout its temple grounds. For it was here, in 1973, that the most famous dragon of all walked its paths and shared with the world his unique insights into martial art as a way of life. It's somewhat startling to realize that Bruce Lee's legacy was largely built on the 4 films that these locations appeared in. And yet, Lee's status, and that of the 4 films he made, have risen over the decades to truly mystical heights. Such is the nature of dragons.